Let's talk about specs, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about specs. Let's talk about specs.
Skip it up and that up.
So a few hours ago on the PlayStation YouTube channel, they had the road to PlayStation 5. And it was like watching a college lecture with Mark Cerny. I respect the man immensely. I think he's brilliant, and I get this was kind of sort of for investors, but with what Microsoft was doing, you would think they'd have a little bit more flair to it. And I felt like I was 16 again, falling asleep in math class. And they still didn't show what the PS5 looks like. But anyway, they did go into details about the specifications of the PlayStation 5 and how it's going to utilize solid state technology, and that's a big way that game worlds are going to expand. On paper, we're going to look at a comparison in a few seconds of the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. It doesn't look like it's going to be as powerful in terms of raw performance compared to the Xbox Series X, but that doesn't seem to tell the whole story. And even if in real-world performance it's not as powerful, the difference is going to be nominal, and I wouldn't lose sleep over the numbers that Sony has revealed. I just wish they would reveal what the goddamn thing looks like. Like, come on, Sony. Like, Microsoft had Austin Evans disassemble the Xbox Series X, show it physically, like he had it in its hands, and we have nothing. We have vaporware from you. We just have numbers. And an ASMR video from Mark Cerny.
If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style.
Come on, do more. But anyway, here are the specs we're going to compare to the Xbox Series X. Then we will discuss. Now here is the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. The PS5 is going to have 8 Zen 2 cores at 3.5 gigahertz with a variable frequency. The Xbox Series X is also going to have 8 cores at 3.8 gigahertz. This image here doesn't tell the whole story. If there's simultaneous multi-threading enabled, which means that per core they can run 2 threads of code, the Xbox Series X Zen 2 CPU will run at 3.66 gigahertz. Now we go down to GPU, or graphics performance, for the PS5 and Series X. On the PS5, it's going to be 10.28 teraflops with 36 compute units at 2.23 gigahertz variable frequency with a custom RDNA 2 GPU, again from AMD. Both the CPU and APU are from AMD in both next-gen consoles. On the Series X, it's going to be 12 teraflops with 52 compute units running at a slightly slower 1.825 gigahertz, again, custom RDNA 2 GPU. On the PlayStation 5 and Series X, they're both going to have 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. Microsoft went into more detail talking about how 3.5 gigabytes of that memory will be a lower speed memory for things like audio and other aspects of gaming, and then 2.5 gigabytes of that memory will be standard speed memory that's allocated for the operating system. Memory bandwidth between the PlayStation 5 and Series X, again, because they have different levels of memory, that's why you're seeing more numbers there for the Series X. In the PlayStation 5, it's going to be 448 gigabytes a second. On the Series X, they're going to have 10 gigabytes of RAM running at 560 gigabytes a second and 6 gigabytes of RAM running at 336 gigabytes a second. Again, that's because the slower memory is going to be used. 2.5 gigabytes is going to be used for the operating system. 3.5 gigabytes is going to be used for sound and other things. Internal storage, 825 gigabyte custom SSD on the PlayStation 5, 1 terabyte custom NVMe SSD on the Xbox Series X. Now, yes, the internal storage on the PlayStation 5 is smaller, but the throughput, as you see here, is significantly faster than the Series X. 5.5 gigabytes per second, and if you compress the data, you're looking at typically 8 to 9 gigabytes per second, whereas on the Series X, raw, you're looking at 2.5 gigabytes a second. Compressed, you're looking at 4.8 gigabytes a second. So That's kind of the ace up Sony sleeve there. We'll talk more about that in a second. On the PlayStation 5, you could put in your own NVMe SSD. So if you want to put in your own drive from whatever brand, so long as it meets the specs, you're good. On Microsoft's side of things, they have a 1 terabyte expansion card, identical performance to the internal storage. We saw that in Austin Evans' video. We saw that a while ago where you saw a very funky expansion slot on the back, and yep, they're gonna have custom drives you could put back there. You can use an external hard drive too, but it will hurt the performance of games, how they load and how data is streamed and accessed. So it's probably recommended to get the official 1 terabyte expansion cards for the Xbox Series X. External storage, they're both going to be USB 3.2. Hard drive support, again, if you use an external drive, even if it's an SSD through USB 3.2, it's going to bottleneck you a little bit, but you can do it. And the optical drive, of course, on both the PS5 and Series X are going to be 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray drives. Now, on paper, generally, the Series X seems like it is going to be a superior machine to the PlayStation 5, but that is not the whole story. But I'll put that aside for a second. One thing that's interesting here is that you would think that there would be more RAM instead of the 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 inside both of these consoles. But times have changed, and Mark Cerny explained this, and I'm going to explain it in layman's terms, because I'm a layman as well, as best as I understand it. Throughout history, consoles, especially on Sony's side, have followed the rule of 16. The PlayStation 1 had 2 megabytes of 16 memory. So multiply that by 16, the PlayStation 2 had 32 megabytes of system memory. There was also video RAM and 1 megabyte of video RAM in the PS1 and PS2. Then if you multiply the 32 megabytes of system memory, it becomes 512. If you combine together the system memory and the video RAM inside the PlayStation 3, 512 megabytes total of RAM. So 16 times 32. Followed suit again. Then if you multiply 512 by 16, you get the 8 gigabytes that is inside of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And in theory, if console makers kept following that rule of 16, inside of the PlayStation 5, you would have 128 gigabytes of GDDR6 RAM, and you would have to take out a home equity loan to buy the consoles. But times have also changed too, and that amount of memory is unnecessary. And Mark Cerny explained that. See, back in the days of the PlayStation 1, PS2, even PS3, and PS4, what you needed the extra memory for was to make up for the slow speeds of the optical drives and mechanical drives. So there was no hard drives, especially in the PS1 and PS2. Later on, you could add one, I know, but that wasn't the norm. So you wanted to have more memory inside the next-gen system so you could store things in the fast RAM instead of having to load it off the CD-ROM or DVD drive, or even on the PlayStation 4 off of the mechanical hard drive, because you'd rather have more RAM instead of waiting for the mechanical hard drive, which they're slow as hell, to access the data it needs, and then you have to stream it. So you get the data off the hard drive, put it in the RAM, and put as much as you could there so you wouldn't have to deal with the bottleneck of either the optical drive or the mechanical hard drive. Now with these super fast solid state drives, especially Sony's, which has a lot more bandwidth and can access raw and compressed data way quicker, like I just showed you, than even the Xbox Series X, you don't need as much memory because they could actually use the hard drive as basically virtually extra RAM. So that's something interesting that they're doing, and that's why they explained why they don't have to keep following that rule of factor of 16, because these super fast solid state drives are going to act like more memory. So you could instantly stream, for an open world game, instantly stream data off of the solid state drive. You could use it to hold on to more textures that you don't have to have in the system RAM. You could just keep it on the solid state drive because it's so damn fast, it acts as extra memory. So that's what is really interesting about what they're doing. And of course, it's a cost-cutting measure because, like I said, if there was 128 gigabytes of RAM in both the next-gen consoles, if they kept following that factor of 16, the consoles would be disastrously expensive, and it just wouldn't have been a good idea. This is a good way to mitigate it, and it works. So it brings costs down, and you won't notice the difference. Wish they kind of put maybe even like 24 or 32 gigs in. Still think it could be a bottleneck down the line in the future with these consoles, but they're going to come out probably with the PS5 Pro and Xbox Series X Pro. They're going to have the lower end Lockhart, the Xbox Series X, and then they're going to have the Xbox Series XX mid-gen refresh with upgraded hardware. Microsoft's terrible at naming their consoles, so I could picture them doing that. So again, now if you look at the GPU performance, it looks like Microsoft is wiping the floor with the PlayStation 5 with the Series X. They have 12 teraflops of compute performance. The PS5 has 10.28 teraflops of compute performance. Yes, the GPU is clocked higher at a higher clock speed of 2.23 gigahertz inside the PS5 as opposed to the Series X being only clocked at 1.825 gigahertz, but there's 52 compute units in the Series X. There's only 36 inside of the PlayStation 5. But then you get into where there is the ace up Sony's sleeve, and I'm reading it again here. You have for the I/O throughput, meaning the hard drive, raw data again at 5.5 gigabytes per second, compressed typically 8 to 9 gigabytes per second access times, whereas on the Series X, it's less than half the access time for raw data and a little less than half the access time for compressed data. And that's where things go big time in Sony's favor. You have huge open worlds. If you have a multi-plat game and The Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, it's going to be able to load worlds faster. It's going to be able to make you fast travel faster on the PlayStation 5. Textures will be able to load faster. They may make open world games run smoother on the PlayStation 5. So even though its GPU seems slightly gimped compared to the Series X, it still may have smoother third-party port experiences because of this much faster I/O throughput. So even though the GPU on paper seems, I wouldn't say anemic, but it seems less powerful than the one in the Series X, Sony may make up in performance due to the super fast I/O throughput, which is key to next-gen consoles. So it's not all about the paper specs. It's about those SSDs and access times, and these are a different animal of consoles compared to the current generation. So before you think that third-party ports are not going to look as good as they will in the Series X, they may actually run superior on the PlayStation 5 as opposed to the Series X due to the I/O throughput and how fast the solid-state drives are. Now, only having 825 gigabytes built into the PS5 and even the 1 terabyte inside of the Series X, like, really? You know, I understand it would bring the cost up, and I understand these are really fast drives, and they didn't want to make the systems too expensive, but you're going to have to constantly swap games in and out, man. All right, whatever. I mean, look, you could add a USB 3.2 hard drive, external hard drive if you want to, but that's going to bottleneck it, and it is what it is. And also, SpawnWave brought this up on Twitter. The one thing about Sony, which is interesting, is they're letting you add your own. You could just add your own NVMe SSD if you want to. But Karen, the soccer mom, is like, oh, my son wants to get more storage. And I don't understand. Like, so what's NVMS ABCDEFG NVMe, and what do you just stick it in here? Is this the right specification? Am I going to light myself on fire doing it? Yes, Karen, you are, Karen, and stop it. So that's cool that Sony's doing it. For guys like me and SpawnWave and us tech nerds, we're going to know what drives to get and what spec drives to get. But Karen's not going to know that, and then she's going to get the wrong drive and bottleneck the PlayStation 5. I appreciate Sony doing that. That's cool. Thank you, Mark Cerny. But I could see for the average consumer that being a problem, but I'm still happy with it nonetheless. So here's the thing. At the end of the day, as I knock into my mic, both of these consoles are beasts. There's some strong points to the Xbox Series X. There's some strong points to the PlayStation 5. But even with the lower performing GPU inside of the PlayStation 5, it still may end up being the more powerful system when it comes to real world performance. Or it may not be, but it seems like it will be here, especially with that beastly solid state drive they have in there. We'll have to see what happens when the systems are finally released, we get our hands on them, and we see how third-party ports perform. This is Rich of Review Tech USA, signing out. Have a good one. Hey, if you enjoy my content, consider becoming a Review Tech USA member. I'll have a link below in the description. I live stream now on this channel all the time, and it gives you access to cool emoticons to use as well while I live stream. Again, link below in the description. Thank you for your continued support.